Sometimes it's the most simple principles that can produce the most profound results. And this principle that I'm going to get into today in this video is something that once I embraced, it actually 10x'd my progress on this self-actualization journey. No matter how much I read, no matter how much I practiced by meditating, no matter how much I was doing journaling or all that kind of stuff that I was into back in the day, it never really produced the results that this thing that I'm going to tell you is going to give you. And it is the lost art of embracing uncertainty. Uncertainty is the spice of life. Now, a lot of the clients that I work with, and also myself, have been guilty of this as well. The reason why we get into this area of life, whether it's more meditation stuff, whether it's healing from shadows, whether it's self-actualization, or whether it's just skill development, is because at some point we have felt some kind of a lack from these things. And the reason we are doing these practices is because we want to fill that lack. We want to overcome whatever was holding us back. This is all good stuff. This is not something to demonize, okay? There's a lot of people out there that will demonize that. They'll be like, oh, it's coming from lack and scarcity and all that kind of stuff. And whilst they understand the broad picture that they're trying to paint with that, it's not very helpful because we have to start somewhere. And by shaming ourselves and by guilting ourselves, it's not going to do us any favors in the long run. So if we're coming from lack, what I've noticed in a lot of people, myself included, from back in the day, is there's more of a propensity to want to control variables. So a majority of the time I work with guys, for whatever reason, they seem to have a leaning towards this. At least in the academic sense. I would actually argue that everyone has a leaning towards this, to want to control the variables of life. So things that are unexpected can be planned for, can be controlled, so their surprise effects can be less devastating if they're negative. The problem with this is it wastes a lot of time and energy trying to control something that we cannot. And like I said at the start of this video, uncertainty is the path to 10xing your progress. Now, what do I mean by this? I guess what I'm trying to say is, learning academically is great. Even practicing certain aspects like meditation, actually doing like a real practical shadow work on yourself, all of that stuff is great. But the one thing that most people try and overlook, and also the principle that they are guiding their life around, is trying to control something which they cannot control. Like I said, uncertainty is the spice of life. And what that means is it's what makes life exciting, it's what makes life fun. But there is a practical reason I'm bringing this idea to you guys, and it's because by embracing that this is just something that's going to happen, it stops us from using up our bandwidth with other nonsensical thoughts of trying to control how we show up and appear in life. That could be the video right there. But as you guys know, I have a little bit of a propensity to break things down with much more granularity, so that's what I'm going to do now. That's what we do here, or that's what I do here in Self-Actualization Systems, which is the channel you're watching in case you don't know. So how can we use this principle of embracing uncertainty, embracing the spice of life? First of all, how can we embrace that principle? And I think the first question that I'm going to answer is, why should you want to do that? Why should you want to come out of your little academic box, your intellectual box, and actually show up in the real world doing the things that you want to do and it looking messy? Why should you want to do that? Because that's where the progress is. For whatever reason, when it comes to this stuff of self-actualizing, of meditation, of shadow work, people think that it doesn't follow the same rules as every other skill department. Now, the skill that we're building is different. It's more vertical versus a horizontal skill building. Vertical skill building is we are leveling up our perspective and the ways we're looking at life. So it's paradigm shifting rather than staying in the paradigm and just getting better at operating from that paradigm. So that would be horizontal, staying in the same paradigm and just optimizing it. Whereas vertical development, which is what self-actualization takes care of most of the time, or at least it has a leaning towards that, is developing our perspectives so that we don't just operate better within our paradigm, we can also shift up to a healthier and mature paradigm. And both are absolutely essential. But for whatever reason, people think that I can just self-affirm to myself all the time and then it's going to manifest in the real world. Okay, so this is not a video on manifesting. The reason I have problems with that kind of a worldview, and manifesting is just a symptom of that worldview, is that it just makes us very passive. It doesn't it takes away all of the other learning styles that we can have. So we can have passive learning style, or receptive learning style is what it's called. Then we can have an agentive or an active learning style. Then we can have a reciprocal learning style. Then we can have an interpenetrative learning style. And I get this from Stages International, from Terry O'Fallon, who developed that system, right? So there's 4 types of learning that we can be embracing. But if we just embrace the system of learning, which seems to be so prevalent in this industry, which is what this channel is trying to change, which is I just sit here, I get my self-actualization talks, I can practice a little bit on my own, but then I don't really do anything different in the world, and then nothing really changes. Like I said, it's one of the things which I see is kind of creeps into a lot of my, or has crept into a lot of my clients' psychology, even if they are successful, which most of them are. And it's something that we have to work through. It's something we have to say, oh yeah, we can't just expect us to do all this work and things to not get messy on the outside. That's the real thing which I think people are afraid of, which I'm calling out right now in this video. The fact that you can do all of this stuff. You can build a good emotional home base. You can let go of shadows. You can have more mindfulness. You can have the right frameworks. But when it's time to go and apply for the job that you want to apply for, when it's time to do that, and we feel that resistance, we feel like there's a little bit of something stopping us, suddenly we make the excuse, oh yeah, I'll just do that later. Oh yeah, there's this person that I've liked for such a long time, and I really like her, and I really like her, I really like him. But because I feel this resistance, it must mean that the self-actualization hasn't worked, so I'll just make sure that self-actualization works, and so I feel perfect in this moment, and then I can do it. Okay? There's all this waiting for permission. And that's why we want to embrace uncertain. We want to embrace the spice of life. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I used to, for the longest time, when I was doing jiu-jitsu and I was competing, I was on this self-actualization journey. I was on the meditation journey. I was doing unconscious, at this time it was conversational hypnotherapy. I was doing that all so I wouldn't feel nervous when I was competing. But then one time, not due to the self-actualization actually, I just showed up to the competition and I didn't really care, so I didn't really get nervous. And I had probably one of the most underwhelming performances I've ever had in my entire life. I didn't get submitted or anything. That's what I mean. At least if I got submitted, there would have been some kind of like adrenaline to it. Or at least if I just got beaten really badly, it would have had some kind of an intensity edge to it. But this was just underwhelming. I just got passed a couple of times, didn't really get anything going, and that was the end of that. And I remember so clearly before stepping onto the mat, I just had a real lack of any nerves at all. Now, despite after that experience, I still wanted to not feel nervous. That was still my goal. However, as I matured along this journey, I realized that those nerves, those heightened senses are there for my benefit. And actually the frame that I should have been coming from, rather than to not feel them, was to feel them and to be okay with them. To use them as a tool rather than them be used by them. Why am I telling you this story? Because that was an example of me embracing uncertainty. And when I actually did that, my performances were much, much closer to my performances in the gym. So for those of you who haven't done a competitive sport or haven't done a competitive combat sport before, a lot of the time we train much better, or the level on the mat, at least until you get better, is much, much better than your level in competition, because there's less nerves, there's less pressure. So you're able to have a much more authentic showcasing of your skill on the mats rather than in competition. That's why people who are respected in the community don't ever talk about beating people on the mats on podcasts or anything like that, because it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is competition, because that's when everything counts, okay? Because it's competition. It's got the pressure. How well do you perform under pressure is a big component of whether you're a good competitor, athlete, artist, or fighter. So this example of me not wanting to feel nerves is a microcosm of what I think is a big blind spot from either everyone watching this channel or maybe people who know people in this community will have, which is the unwillingness to embrace uncertainty and kind of get your hands dirty. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to accept that no matter how much you've practiced or journaled, I don't really recommend journaling, but it can be useful for some people. But no matter how much you've journaled, or how many cold showers you've done, or how much deep unconscious shadow work even you've done, or how much meditation you've done. All of these are stacking the odds in your favor. But at the end of the day, we actually have to step up into the real world and go after the things that we want to do. And if these things in the real world are challenging, still challenging for us, that is not evidence to suggest that these things we're doing aren't working. The only way that we can see that these things aren't working is if we cannot do this thing, okay? And I would actually argue that a lot of you people watching, I actually think that you are capable of doing whatever that thing is in your mind that you think is holding you back, that you just think that one more hour of meditation or one more shadow release or one more video from Aaron or whatever is just gonna teach me to do this thing and then I'll feel ready. I actually think you guys are ready right now. It's just embracing the fact that uncertainty is there, and the sooner you embrace that, the more you get inoculated to uncertainty, and then the last stage is the more you get excited by uncertainty. So uncertainty is actually a thing that fuels you rather than a thing that holds you back. But it begins here. It begins by just accepting the reality of the world, that these things that I want to go after, because I just have a lack of experience in this thing, or I have a lack of exposure to this thing, a certain amount of messiness, a certain amount of nerves, a certain amount of uncertainty of how this is going to land is going to be there, and I embrace it. That right there is the mindset shift, okay? Which is why I'm gonna bring in, for those of you that are still listening, I'm gonna have a little bit of a bonus meta-analysis of what map you can place this into. And I get this from my mentor, Kim Barter. So we have 5 different internal issues that we can have. The first one is biological or organic. This is when there is like an actual brain chemistry thing wrong, or like a nervous system thing wrong. And there's actually like a thing where there's actually something which is measurable. Like you can take an MRI scan or an X-ray and you can identify the thing, oh yeah, you're not producing enough serotonin, or there's something wrong with the nerves over here and they're not attached properly. That's like a biological issue. That is something which this channel cannot solve because it's not a medical channel. Now there could be certain things, like certain ways that you hold yourself or certain eating habits that you have that might be caused by shadow. So like being overweight is a biological issue if it's impacting your health, right? But the reasons for you becoming overweight, because it's an avoidance cycle most likely, or it's a way that you can control something that when your life felt uncontrollable, or it's just a lack of discipline because you have a low self-esteem, or there's so many different reasons. Don't take any of these as prescriptions, by the way. There's a ton of different reasons why it can happen, and there can also be non-shadow reasons, of course, but there can be shadow or trauma-related issues. And then so in that way, shadows can affect the organic issues. But the organic issues in and of themselves are something that we're not going to be able to solve. That's something where you go see a doctor or a psychiatrist. Second internal issue we can have is a developmental issue. This usually comes with confusion, where we're kind of halfway stepping between 2 different stages, one that's more mature, one that's less mature. It doesn't mean that this side is not mature, it just means that there's 2 opposing, conflicting worldviews within us, okay? And this is something where we have to solve our confusion by reaching the next stage, by reaching the next level. So an example would be, which is probably what I think a lot of my audience is. If this is correct, put it in the comments, because this will be interesting to kind of see where you guys are at. Most people have just come out of something which we would call the achiever paradigm. It's not to say that achievement becomes irrelevant after this, of course it doesn't, but it stops being this thing that we make into something that it's not. So people who are in the achiever paradigm, they just want to achieve goals, so making subtle goals for themselves, because goals are subtle. Somebody who's very concrete thinking doesn't make goals in the sense of I want to be the greatest. It would be much more like I just want to dominate, or I just want to fight. But once we achieve these goals, once we get money or success with dating or the ability to travel the world, we start to realize that these things, these external things, were never going to make us happy. So it invites us to move to the next stage, pluralism, which is the ability, or when we start to really become aware of what's happening internally, and we start to become really interested and fascinated by that, and really in touch, and we realize that happiness is only ever going to come from within. But when you're treading these 2 worlds, it can become very confusing. This is the developmental issue. And a lot of my coaching can actually help a lot with this as well. That's obviously why it's called self-actualization. So if you're in this kind of confusion state, then I'd actually recommend you to go and book in a free call with me where we just talk about you, your journey, how that relates to me and my mentorship. And there's no hard sales, no hard selling. We just kind of see what's the best package, what's the best option for you to move forward. And I have some free resources as well that I can give to you guys there. The third one is grief. This is sadness issues. If a family member of mine dies, that's not a shadow work issue. That's not something which I can heal. That's a natural grieving process, and the grieving process helps us let go of the old and to make space for the new. Okay, again, not a shadow issue. Fourth one is a shadow issue. I've covered that a ton of times. I'm not going to go too much into depth in this video because you guys hopefully will know what that is. But it's basically taking unconscious blocks, taking unconscious shadows, deep unconscious insecurities, bringing them to light. It's a fancy way of saying healing them, and then allowing that leftover space, something new, to grow inside that space so we can turn that thing that was actually holding us back into maybe one of our greatest strengths. But the fifth one, which is why I wanted to bring this up, is something called innocence. It's a lack of exposure, a lack of experience, a lack of doing the thing that we want to do. Hence why it's called innocence. The same way that a child is very innocent or a baby is very innocent is because they haven't been subjected to what the world is like. That sounds really pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm actually very optimistic. But there's certain realities of life which they haven't been exposed to. This is where a lot of people hit a brick wall, which is why I'm bringing this up. Just simply by accepting that we are in innocence, which takes a lot of humility, by the way, to do, especially when we've been on this journey for such a long time, which I'm sure a lot of you have been. Simply by accepting the fact that we have innocence around standing up for ourselves, setting boundaries, around dating and relationships, around opening up to friends, around making friends, around being social, around taking risks. Just by accepting that we have innocence, it takes the pressure off. It takes the pressure off immensely because we're no longer projecting this ideal self that we have to somehow live up to, who's like super confident and never feels these things and never doubts himself and always sticks up for herself and all that kind of stuff. We have to let go of that illusion and accept where we're at. And by having this frameworks, it makes it so much easier because we realize it's not a grief issue, it's not a biological issue, it's not a developmental issue, it's not even a shadow work issue, it's an innocence issue. And we solve innocence issues by exposure therapy. This is where exposure therapy is really, really powerful. This is the whole point of this video. I called it uncertainty because that's another word for it. But by embracing uncertainty, by accepting the fact that we do have innocence at this stage, it frees up our energy. We're no longer beholden to this image that we built up into our head. We're a beginner again. Beginner's mind, as they say in Zen. Always have a beginner's mind. So like I said, if these kind of topics sound really interesting to you in a long-term format, I do have my one-on-one link below. No hard sales, no hard selling. And there's a bonus here that I'm going to give you, which is how do we move this forward? How do we actually start to hold ourselves accountable? Because this is what accountability is made for, is these kind of situations. Well, what we need to do is we need to write out the areas that we're having friction, all of them, and I want you to categorize them, whether they're biological, whether they're developmental issues, whether they're shadow issues. So you have like a very clear understanding of which of these issues fall into. Okay. Now, what you're also going to find, obviously, there's going to be a mix of things. It's not going to be like a one size fits all necessarily all of the time. That's why you list them out in orders of priority. Like, which one does this feel most? Does this feel innocence first? Okay, that's innocence. And then you can add a secondary factor. And if you really want to, you can add a third factor. And then you're going to take all of these things and all of the ones which have innocence. Okay. The other categories are going to be really, really useful for you if you're using this channel, doing your homework. Because now at least you have a list of all of the things that are more shadow related and more developmental related, and you can click on the relevant playlists, you can click on the relevant videos to help you with that. But we're just dealing with the innocence issues right now. So with those innocence issues, you have a list of them now. You just pick one which ideally you're most motivated for, and if it's solved, will have the biggest domino effect in your life. And then you just expose yourself to that, exposure therapy. And then say if it has like shadow or something as a secondary, you do shadow work as an auxiliary, but it's no longer the driving force. And this is what is going to 10x your progress, because you're going to start doing the most effective thing for these issues rather than trying to solve it in a roundabout way that's indirect. We're going straight to the heart of it. Enjoy, guys.